Welcome to 50/50 Books, the book review podcast where the books are split in two, and figuring out just what is going on is always a toss-up. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Jonathan. This episode we are finishing up In the Winter Woods by Isabelle Adler. So what are the general vibes, Taylor? How you feeling having finished this book?
I do think we were correct in the assessment of it being kind of minimalist. I feel like that does carry through. But I actually liked it. And I don't know why I sounded so apprehensive when I said that. I think it's still a little bit too minimalist for me.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Which could make some things feel a little bit too superficial. But like for the most part, the romance felt pretty good. The mysteries I liked. It was pretty good. What about you?
Yeah, I feel like the book was somewhat straightforward, and we talked about it being on the shorter side, so it makes sense. But it was not like a problem for this book, so I really enjoyed it. And yeah, I feel like we didn't even 100% the theories like I thought we might. So, so you know, it left enough mystery for us to play with. So I thought, you know, I had a good time with it. I'm excited to talk about it.
And more ended up happening than I guess we assumed would happen, mystery wise. There's like a few different ones going on, but for the most part, the suspect stays the same. We have the mayor, we have Atwood, we have the Duttons, and then we have the Davises. And that's kind of who we're interacting with. Declan, of course, in our first part, decided not to meddle. So obviously he meddles. To be fair, at the beginning, it's kind of just like him talking to people. So is he meddling? I guess he could make a case if he wanted to. I call it meddling. Because it does feel like he's still trying to gather information.
Yeah. I can understand why it's hard to not be curious enough to want to ask questions when the opportunities arise. So I think like it probably starts from, I could see it starting from not even noticing that that's what he's doing, but then he does kind of return to the, no, I want to figure this out pretty quickly.
Yeah. But before we get into that, I suppose, we'll just start with the mayor, because I think he's the first one. I think almost immediately when we start again, we have a conversation with the mayor, which is what we were hoping for.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty dismissive, kind of blasé conversation about what happened, which of course seems suspect, but it wasn't ringing any alarm bells for me personally.
It just felt like it was in character for the mayor being kind of this self-identified celebrity figure.
Yeah.
Where he's like, no, I have much more important things to attend to.
Yeah, and I think he is very much kind of personifying that idea that everybody kind of hated Porter here, and he's just kind of living that truth. Like, he did not care about Porter either, so why would he feel bad that he's dead type of mentality.
Right.
So obviously it seems like he's guilty because he wants the case to be wrapped up quickly, but like, yeah, to your point, he kind of just wants it to be done with, especially because it looks bad, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about this because in the next time we see him, I believe, is the festival, and he seems a bit more anxious about like Declan getting involved in investigating and uncovering and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't really seem to me like that's, I mean, obviously he's not guilty, and it doesn't come off as that even, I would say, in the moment. I really do think he's such an image kind of guy that like this doesn't look good for him as a mayor. It could put a bad name on the town. Like and I think it does at one point reference the fact that this is seen in the news. And I'm sure he doesn't want his small town that's building a theme park and looking for tourists to be known as one in which murders happen. So I kind of figured that was more of the angle.
Yeah, for sure. The only like possible issue with that whole idea is Haley does seem to think it's him. A few people, think it's him because Porter had accused the mayor of embezzling. Classic. Which we had thought there was some kind of corruption going on, money corruption, being the actual cause of the murder. It is, but just not with the mayor. But at the very least, it seems like there's a possible motive there. But Monroe dismisses it pretty quickly, kind of just like Porter accused everybody of everything, so it's probably not that. But I'll still look, but I don't think it is.
And he does look, right? Because now that you mention that, he mentions that when Declan tries to call him, he's looking through the mayor's computer files or something like that.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
So it sounds like he at least tried to address it.
Yeah, I think throughout all of this, we can say Monroe is doing his job.
Mm-hmm.
Moving away from the mayor, we can actually get into other mystery, I guess, that Monroe does figure out. Declan just gets there, like, coincidentally slightly ahead of him, but they're pretty much in line together, which is the whole Logan situation, right?
Yeah.
Logan, at first, is weird, because we do get a Logan-Declan conversation. He says some weird stuff. He seems to be hiding something, and it seems separate from the Secret Son stuff, because guess what? He is the Secret Son, we figured. Porter didn't know that. I think that makes sense based on what happened.
And Logan says he, at a certain point, didn't want him to know it.
Right, which I think also makes sense, because Porter seems like the worst person to exist. But it does seem like Logan knows something more about the murder happening, and he's, like, worried about Monroe having seen something that night, and just kind of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, like, the first Declan not trapped, but, like, Declan confronting, quote-unquote, the killer before, like, Monroe can get there. It's the first time that happens. You're not going to believe it. It happens again.
It did feel too early when it came, so I was like, it's definitely not this. Like, we're in chapter 11, 12, 13, whatever it was. It's like, we've got too much book left.
Yeah, definitely. So I was like, this is not what's happening here. But there is, like, a very real fear, because that's kind of what they're working on right now, right? Like, Declan and Monroe both think the Secret Son is the one who did it. Or at least that's, like, the best motive at the moment, right? So it makes sense.
It's a good suspect to consider, yeah.
Yeah, so once Declan figures out the Secret Son stuff, he's now in a very worrying position, and he calls Monroe about it, and Monroe is like, okay. And the weird thing for me is, like, is this not a texting society? Like, why are you calling him? Just send him a text, maybe?
That's a great point, actually, because it was very conspicuous, right? Like, Logan's like, who are you calling? Like, it feels, too obvious.
Right. But yeah, things seem tense at the moment.
I mean, Declan he goes a little too hard, too fast, in my opinion. Like, it's one of those situations where if you're looking for something, you'll find it. And, like, he's so weirdly observing Logan while he's doing the work and observing all of the observations Logan seems to be making in his head without, I don't know, actually directly asking them. He's like, Logan is like looking at this aspect of the window and that aspect of like the outside of the house. Like, he must be curious about the darn rock that was thrown through the window. I feel like he's just projecting at that point, really. Like, that's the only reason he thinks that he's just anxious. And so he escalates it a lot between the phone call. I mean, I think the phone call was smart. He shouldn't have brought him home alone to begin with. But when he like pulls out the kitchen knife and is like, watch out, stay back, or whatever it is, I'm like, you've escalated this earlier than it needed to be escalated.
Yeah, because it is the meddling issue at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Declan just tries too hard. He does start asking like very specific questions.
Oh yeah, and they're accusatory for sure.
Even bringing, I think, Haley into it, or that might have happened earlier, but like just like making very bad mistakes. He says it's because he's trying to stall so Monroe can get there, but I'm like, then ask him about his wedding. Like, why are you trying to stall with questions that are going to upset a possible murderer? Like, I don't understand.
No, totally. We can just be conversational, neutral. We don't have to escalate things while it's happening.
Yeah.
No, totally. Like, I would be so upset if I were Logan. And Logan even says, like, listen, I don't think this whole book thing is a good idea. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of agree with you because Declan's going to make enemies out of the whole damn town doing what he's doing right now.
Yeah. Which is crazy because the book is the end of this. Like, that's a reality that's happening. I know. Which is,
and he kind of goes back and forth. Like, he's like, actually, I'm not going to make the book. And then a chapter later, he's like, haha, I made the book, you know?
Yeah, kind of wild. But we can, I guess, talk about that at a different point. I think it's too soon to write a true crime about a murder like 2 murders that just happened. Seems a little insensitive.
And kind of involved you in an attempt as well.
Right, a little crazy. But thankfully, Monroe isn't that far away. I think he's just next door. So he gets there pretty quickly. He surprisingly de-escalates the situation.
I was very impressed.
It was very impressive. And then they just have like the interrogation questioning in Declan's living room.
Yeah, that was bizarre. It didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it especially didn't make sense because like Declan isn't supposed to meddle. So like why are we giving him kind of what he wants, like enabling him, right? Like Declan shouldn't be there for this conversation. He's not a police officer. Yeah,
there's like a few moments of casual inclusion of Declan because he's in a room while things are happening. It's the one part where, as professional, mature about everything Monroe is, like, this doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, like, the way Monroe has been characterized, he would just pull, even if he doesn't arrest him immediately, he would just pull Logan into a separate scenario to question him as opposed to doing it right there.
Right.
Especially because he does then get arrested anyway. I guess the only thing I could think of is if just like knowing, even if he just determined that Logan was the son, that maybe wasn't enough on its own to arrest him, and he needed to get him to say something else where it's like, okay, we do actually have enough suspicion to like have to bring you in for questioning. But that was never said, so that's like me giving a lot of credit, I think, to the book. Like, I think it really should have, like, he should have just been arrested immediately.
Yeah, I think if he's like the main suspect, even just from the Secret Son angle, which Monroe has confirmed, like birth certificate confirmation, he can still bring Logan in for questioning. At the very least, Declan should not have been there. I think it was crazy that he was. Especially Declan asking his own questions, like, sir, get out of here.
Yeah, for sure. That's what it gets me too, is he will ask a question and he's always way too direct about it.
Yeah.
And like presumptive, right? Like he'll be like, and that's why you did the murder, you know? And it's like, no, you don't ask those questions. Like you have to guide the person there to like, you're looking for information. You're not looking for a confession. Like I think Declan is really confession focused.
Mm-hmm. I think it just would also make him feel better if he like had caught the killer trying to kill him, and like this is I think another moment where we get where Declan mentions his main character Owen or whatever, like Owen would do this and blah blah blah. So like yeah, he's still kind of trying to like live that high a little bit.
He kind of uses that to lean into the self-important part of himself, I think. Like, I think a lot of these actions are like him feeling like, oh, this has to do with me because I got the rocks through the window. This has to do with me because I'm new here. Like it's all to do with me. And it's like, well, maybe it's not. Like you should take a chill pill. We got people on it.
This is such a different conversation, but it is kind of annoying that is never like dealt with. Like I don't know if Declan ever has the realization that he is doing dangerous things he should not be doing. Like there are moments where he thinks I should let the authorities handle this, and that's fine, but then he goes on to do the things he's trusting the authorities to do. So it's like, what is like really happening here? And he never, I don't know if we end this book with him saying like it wasn't about me, for one thing. I don't think that happens.
That definitely doesn't happen.
Yeah, and then also like I probably shouldn't have risked my life in dumb ways. I don't know. It's like
I don't think he went as far to say that it was dangerous. Right? I think I agree with you. The one thing he does say is like I was too hard on Logan. He was pretty free flowing with his personal safety. He didn't really seem to care all that much. Right? He in the first half yelled out into the void like I'm not going anywhere. So. He just got a little messy about it. And I think, definitely as time goes on, he gets less careful about his personal safety. And we'll get into it later with the confrontation and everything, and then he really becomes self-important where he's like, I have to go solve things. And like, I have to put myself on the line, and I can't get like, I can't be too abrasive with getting Monroe on it. Like things like that, where it's like, no, like these don't make sense. Like I think you're just putting yourself on the line because you can, and because you don't have other things to make you feel important right now.
Damn.
I mean, it's kind of just his situation. I'm not saying, I don't want to insult him, but I think that's just the situation he's in. He's a little depressed, right? Like his books aren't doing that well. I think this is giving him something to do.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. Yeah. And it doesn't help that like Monroe is so flat of a character. I think that's what I've decided on, that he just will not push back against what Declan is doing. Like Monroe just, I feel like, doesn't care at all through the entirety of this book, which doesn't make sense for I think the way he was set up originally.
I think he just is trying to remain relatively neutral, right? Like I think he's not trying to cause drama by confronting Declan about it. But it's the sort of thing where it could have bit him in the butt for not doing so, right?
I feel like he was made kind of blank slatey so that Declan could kind of do whatever he wanted and like feel however he wanted. But it just means that Monroe doesn't have much like of a personality or like a direction. It's kind of, it just,
that's fair.
That's how it felt sometimes. But regardless, Declan being an idiot kind of does also come up during our next murder, because yes, there are two that happen in this book.
Yes, both in such close proximity to Declan.
Yes, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But it's after the Christmas festival, which we can talk about later. But he ends up going home early, I think, and he sees that somebody has disturbed, like, the snow around his cabin. And so he does what any sane person would do, in which he gets out of his car and investigates himself.
Yeah. Speaking of lack of text messages, like, this would have been the moment, like, if he's going to go investigate, to be like, hey, like, I'm noticing something, I'm going to check it out.
Also, as a woman, I could just not imagine even getting out of the car. I would call the fucking police.
Way too bold. It's like, to see that things have been disturbed like that, and it's like, this is not like in a city, right? Like, I don't know, like if I came home and like my plants out front were a little disheveled, I'd be like, darn kids, you know? Like, I wouldn't think anything of it. But if I'm living in a cabin in the middle of Vermont where there's like 20 people in the town with me, and like I live kind of, you know, secluded in the woods, and I see something that's disturbed, that's a whole different story. Like, yes, I'm definitely calling someone, especially with the context.
Yeah, within the context, like, somebody has been murdered and you're receiving threatening notes. Like, it's just so crazy.
So this is getting more into it, right? He finds his way to the basement and notices that the doors have been kind of tampered with and well oiled, which I thought was such a funny feature. And he goes down there and like he steps in something and he's like, what the heck is this? Like, there's something sticky under my feet. And then he realizes that a crime has occurred when he sees the body and is like, oh shoot, like, I need to get out of here, but I need to not disturb the crime scene. And I was like, oh, now you remember.
Yeah. It's like, this, along with other things that happen later, it's just slightly frustrating because within the context of what this book is, it makes sense, but he really just is enabled to do these things because it's important that he's here, right? That he takes pictures and he gets to look back and see what kind of markings were left. Like, that matters for the end. And then obviously for like saving Martha, it matters that he goes off on his own. But it's like, I'm kind of annoyed that like the dumb things he decides to do are like necessary dumb things because he figures it out. But I guess that's a cozy mystery, right? Like,
yeah, I mean,
I'm complaining.
At this point he kind of switches to being a bit more immature, right? I think the first half of the book I don't necessarily get immature from him. I think everything feels awfully mature, in fact. But the second half, like, I mean, it took me one chapter before I was texting the group chat being like, oh, Declan is messy, like, he's not who I thought he was. And I do think you're right, like, it is kind of the way that the plot is able to move along is him being a little messier about it. And I don't think it fully bothers me that that's the case. Like, I think he's supposed to come off as like a little bit irresponsible, and especially because he kind of has that self-reflection moment at the end where he's like, maybe I was too much with Logan. Like, I think he has moments where he's like, this is stupid. I think if he was really like not acknowledging it ever, like there was not a single, because he's also not acknowledging it all the time, but if there was not a single moment where he was like, I was being a little stupid, then maybe I wouldn't like it as much.
Right. Yeah, I get what you mean. It can make sense if he feels like he's kind of caught up in it, like he's kind of just riding the wave. And so like it's an exciting situation to be in, and so he's getting kind of excited about it. I think that makes sense if he's acting a little silly, goofy. But I'm like, damn, he's really doing some wild shit and still staying in this fucking house for some reason.
I know, honestly.
That's the real travesty of this book, that he just... Well, actually, he does have to leave at this point, doesn't he?
Yeah, they make him leave because his house becomes a crime scene.
Yeah, thank God. Yeah. Thank God they make him leave. So the body ends up belonging to Evan Dutton, which is crazy because we thought he was the killer, or at least I did, for the most part.
No, I definitely did, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So he's
You
dead.
had me convinced. I didn't at first, but you convinced me.
Oh, well, my bad. And we figure out that it's so crazy, like a crazy extra crime has been committed.
This is the silliest thing in this book, I feel like. It was funny to me. It's not bad, it's just funny.
Yeah, it's so funny. The Duttons basically were losing, I think, their trees because of a certain parasite or like illness amongst their trees.
Just some disease, yeah.
The issue comes in when they decided to like import syrup from Canada, and they were hiding it in Declan's basement for years.
Yeah. And illegally, like importing it, not like
yes.
It's crossing a border and being taxed and whatever, right? They were like taking a boat across a lake to Canada to get this syrup. And I'm just like, wow, there's really enough infrastructure to the illicit syrup trade for this.
That's so wild. But really what that means is Evan was there, because I think Evan was scrambling to try and like move something or fix something because Declan was around.
Mm-hmm.
And so he saw who took the shovel.
Yeah. Everyone was really messing with Declan's place left and
It's
right.
crazy, yeah. Oh, and that brings us to our next mystery. Yeah, because I think it was not Evan trying to move something. I think he was leaving the first note or like...
Oh, that's totally what it was.
Doing something like that, yeah.
That's totally what it was.
Martha admits that it was her and Evan that were leaving the threatening notes because of the maple syrup, so completely unrelated to the murder that had happened.
We got the people right on this, but definitely not the reason.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Like, I also had thought, I think I mentioned it last episode, of thinking maybe Martha was kind of working solo on this situation and like maybe having beef with her husband. So for a second when Evan died, I was like, maybe Martha did it. But it made no sense because it happened at Declan's house, and that doesn't line up with the thought that Martha was trying to protect Declan with those notes.
Yeah, I can understand Martha's frustration now, like within the context of literally their family business involved in like illegal activity, basically.
I wonder if they ever asked Declan how long he was planning on sticking around, because I don't think the answer was forever per se. Like, I guess maybe they were just worried about the short term.
Yeah, I think Declan was only supposed to be there for like the winter anyway.
I guess that's long enough that it would really affect their business, though.
Yeah, if they have to transport stuff, it would be a bit of a pain. But maple syrup aside, I suppose, the important thing is that Evan did see who the murderer was, but he didn't tell anybody. He told Martha that he knew, but he didn't tell her because he wanted to protect her, I would assume. But he did try to threaten the murderer for money. Crazy maneuver.
That's actually wild.
Crazy. And then crazier to meet with the murderer alone.
Yep.
In like a hidden location, basically.
I think he just thought he had power in the situation that he didn't have.
It's so dumb. And only for like, I think it was $5,000.
Yeah.
Which is like a good amount of money, but also that's it. Like,
yeah, I thought it would be like a revolving thing, like where he's like, oh, like if you want me to stay shut, like you're going to keep paying me. And if you stop paying me, I'll say something. Which maybe it was. Like, we don't really know what would have happened in the continuous, but.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a lot of money things in this book, honestly. Like, pretty much everything is incentivized by money.
Yeah, even the romance has its issues because of money, basically. You know, work and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Less exactly money, but close enough.
Yeah, more of, I mean, but it is, right? Like, Declan is talking pretty often about not having money anymore, really, so.
Mm-hmm. So, Martha does mention to Monroe and Declan, who's there for this conversation for some odd reason. Like, he gets apologized to for the notes, but, like, then he ends up staying for, like, the interrogation again. And she mentions Evan had knew the murderer, didn't tell her. Monroe and Declan aren't sure if that's true, like, if Martha knows or not. But this is kind of when everything starts coming together, right? Because the mayor and Atwood come into the room, and they end up hearing part of this, or I can't remember if Monroe tells them. I think they hear part of this. The point is, the mayor and Atwood now know that Martha might know who the murderer is.
Right.
Which is when I started having thoughts, because I was like, okay, we're running out of suspects here, so who is it? And also Atwood does this very suspect thing in which Gleason is supposed to take Martha home. Also, Gleason probably will not talk about him in this episode, but he's annoying, just so everybody knows.
Yeah, there's little to say beyond that.
Yeah, he's a piece of garbage. But Gleason's supposed to bring Martha home, but Atwood, like, insists on bringing her back, like, borrowing the mayor's car and, like, driving her home, and he gets really pushy about it.
Yes, he does.
So that's when I was like, oh, it's Atwood then.
That's the major red flag. Yeah, I think for me it was like basically like right before this scene, just because it's not Evan, and I figure it's not Martha from the things I said before, where I was like, well, like, I guess that means it's probably going to be the embezzling situation, so that kind of leaves the mayor and Atwood. But when the mayor emphasizes that the theme park is Atwood's project, I was like, I mean, this is probably going to come back down to the theme park, so I kind of figured Atwood was going to be the guy at that point. And so when he starts behaving like this, I'm like, oh yeah, here we go. And then on top of that too, there's the bike tracks are noticed, and I couldn't actually remember if that was Atwood or not, but I was like, I don't remember, but it's probably Atwood.
I still was like wondering if maybe it would be the mayor and Atwood together.
Yeah,
but yeah,
that's fair.
The bike tracks are pretty clear. Like Atwood was mentioned in the beginning riding a bike, and then at that point we kind of just get the end sequence, right? Like Declan is supposed to be leaving to catch a work party, but he ends up realizing the bike tracks and like Atwood being weird, and he kind of puts the pieces together that it's Atwood entirely.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Atwood, I guess. We don't actually have a pretty long conversation with him one-on-one. He's like the only one we don't really talk to. We have a short exchange, but it's like pretty much about the festival. It's not that much entirely. Mm-hmm. He kind of falls to the background, which is, I mean, makes him even more suspect.
Honestly,
that he does that.
He seems to be pretty good at being in the background, honestly. Like, it's probably pretty helpful to him that the mayor is trying to be such a visible character.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed when they were having their conversation at the festival that at this point Logan had been taken in for questioning, and there was definitely some chatter about that. Like, Janice has some chatter of like, oh man, like this whole like Logan being Porter's son thing like really complicates stuff. Like, it'd be crazy if it were him. And when they get into this conversation with Atwood is like, oh yeah, awful, his own flesh and blood offered him like that. And it's like, wow, we're like really just like hopping right into like assuming Logan did it because he was arrested. Which I guess is like maybe some small town, or not even just small town, but just like public taking in news behavior. But I did notice that Atwood pushed that narrative a little strong. Like, he was direct with like, oh, it's definitely what happened.
Yeah, I think I didn't really catch it too much because I think the mayor does the same thing, right? Like, he's so willing to accept that it's Logan that did it.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess I just thought the mayor was like, oh, thank goodness this is going to be over. Like, he just wants someone arrested, quite frankly, right?
Yeah, I definitely think that's the reason the mayor would say something like that. Atwood saying it, I could believe it's because he's friends with the mayor. Like, they work in the same town mayor circle. But it is, like, best for him to kind of push this narrative. Mm-hmm. Especially to, like, the writer in town. Like, oh my god, look how crazy this is.
I think there's something about the detail that he uses when he says it that makes it feel different, right? Like, he's not just saying that Logan did it, he's really emphasizing the motive, right? And that's what feels like it's hiding, right? He's like, oh, like this motive, we need to, like, if I push this motive as the reason this happened, people won't believe that another motive is the reason. This motive is so good, like, I'm going to advertise that.
Right, it sounds good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
I think we kind of backtracked a second when we had that conversation, right? Because then Declan figures out what's going on with Atwood and is like, Martha is in danger, I have to do something about it.
Yeah, so Atwood obviously is kind of floating in the background. He does say some odd things, but it's like nothing too suspect. So it does feel very like sudden, quick paced when we get to the end of this book, and Declan is like, oh, okay, all the pieces now, I know who did it. And then he goes after Atwood and Martha to kind of save. Okay, well, he doesn't go after them immediately. He does try to call Monroe, thank God.
Yeah, thankfully he does something, though. Yeah, he could have tried harder, in my opinion. He could have tried harder,
but Monroe doesn't answer because, as I think we mentioned before, Monroe was looking through other things, and he, I think, ignored Declan's call, which is kind of crazy.
Ignored the call.
They had, I think, a beef, so I guess it makes sense, but like also Declan has been in danger multiple times, so maybe we pick up.
I agree. That one was a little weird because he has encouraged Declan to be communicative. And I understand he was probably like a little sad or in his feels or something about Declan leaving, but he had been pretty mature about everything up till that point, even in that conversation. So it is weird he didn't pick up.
Yeah, it's definitely on purpose so that Declan can call Janice instead. Crazy maneuver. I would call it like a 911, maybe.
I know, he even tells Janice to call 911. Like, you have a phone you're calling people with right now.
And then we get Declan going over to the house to snoop around, I guess, and keep an eye on things and eventually confront our killer.
Mm-hmm. And this definitely happened in the opposite direction of what I thought when we talked about this as a theory in the first half. I definitely thought like Declan would figure it out, but that it wouldn't be in his control. Like, I thought the killer would start targeting him because the killer would determine that Declan figured it out. But in this case, that's not what happens at all. Like, he actually actively seeks out the killer.
Yeah, I think we were both maybe anticipating more of what happened with Logan before, like Declan's stuck in a bad situation with the killer.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this one, it's more so Declan rushing after the killer, which I guess is for the best reason possible, because he does end up saving Martha from poison this time. We're switching it up.
Yeah, this was an interesting change because up until this point, Atwood has been, using blunt force tactics to do his murders. So I thought it was weird that he would poison Martha. It sounded maybe like he was just trying to step up his game, right? Like according to Declan, it seems like he was trying to stage it as a suicide. I'm not sure that Atwood ever confirms that, but
I think he does.
Okay.
I think Atwood mentions like the story of Martha losing her husband and then killing herself.
Okay. Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. Like he's changed his strategy, and also where did he get poison? It's like had he been planning it maybe, and that's why, right? Like he knew that it was Martha, and if things got escalated after Evan's death, like he'd be ready to go with the poison. Like I thought it was interesting the level of planning this time.
Yeah, it is a lot of planning considering he didn't know. I mean, I guess he knew because of Evan, and then he could have just assumed Martha knew.
I mean, that's what he's doing, right? He's assuming that she knows.
Yeah, but I always felt like he started assuming that because it's what's said in the commissioner's office. Like, Monroe and Declan and Martha, I think, say that amidst the meeting. But, like, why didn't Martha die when Evan died? Like, why is she still alive?
I mean, maybe it was just easier to pick off one at a time, right? Atwood's just one person.
I mean, yeah, but it seems like risky if you're planning to kill Evan because he knows, like for sure, because Evan reached out to you and was like, "I know you're the murderer." Why would you not also assume Martha knew and then just also take care of her?
But maybe he wasn't thinking about it that way. Honestly, like I'm sure he's experiencing a decent amount of anxiety and isn't thinking clearly about all of this because he's murdered people. So I think maybe he just wasn't thinking that completely about it at the moment that he thought to kill Evan.
That's fair. Like, yeah, he might want to assume Martha doesn't know, and then that becomes more difficult when they're in the commissioner's office and everybody is saying, "We think Martha knows who the killer is." And now he's like, "Oh, I definitely have to do something now."
Right, exactly. And he saw the opportunity. I think he prepared for the situation, but didn't think it was necessary off the bat. I don't know. You're right, because again, he did have the poison ahead, so he must have thought about it.
Right.
Or he just has poison for some reason. Like that's the only other thing, but it doesn't make a ton of sense.
And to be fair, this is like the worst time to do it. Like you just offered to give her a ride and then you're going to kill her. Like it's poison, yeah. But you can test for poisons. And like I feel like you would still get questioned in that scenario.
I guess that's a good point. I think he's hoping that like the suicide, play would cover it, like they wouldn't question it and not look into it anymore because it would make a lot of sense. But if they do, I mean, they're probably going to want to figure out what she did if she did die and they think it's suicide. So I think you're right that it would be found out.
Yeah. We're overthinking, I think.
It passed for me when we were reading it.
Yeah. It didn't feel like terrible reading it. It did feel like the cliche, especially when we get the villain's monologue.
Yeah, for sure.
Because Declan is like discovered. He stops Martha from drinking the poison. And so now Atwood has a gun because he's, and now Martha and Declan are in danger of being shot.
And there's Declan with his shovel as a weapon.
Yeah.
Felt silly after the whole, the original murder weapon was a shovel thing and it was Declan's house, but whatever, it's fine. Full circle, I suppose.
Yeah.
I guess that's probably what it was for, right? Maybe that was supposed to feel like justice of like, oh, like he killed Porter with a shovel, so now we're going to knock him with a shovel.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely also just a good, I don't want to say tie back. It's not really a tie back, but like that is what he had in his car was a shovel. Like it made sense narratively that he had a weapon.
That's a good point.
So it feels consistent, I guess, as well as a bit full circle.
Mm-hmm.
So Declan is recording. He gets the villain's monologue. He does that questioning thing again, which is a real danger when you have a gun pointed at you.
Yeah, it was very bold.
Yeah, for sure. But I think Declan is also kind of like at least if I die, he'll be arrested with a confession, which is a really crazy, dark thought to have.
I guess that's what I mean when I said earlier, like, he really, like, that lack of self-care increases over time, right? When he gets to this point, he really doesn't even care about his own result. I mean, he cares a little bit, but he doesn't care nearly as much as he did before of his own outcome.
Like, Martha, obviously frightened out of her mind. Declan is a little too chill.
honestly. He's willing to play the game a little bit. It's not smart.
But it does, for the most part, work in his favor, I guess. Because he gets the confession, and then I think Atwood is planning to do... What is he planning to do? A murder-suicide? I can't remember. He's trying to spin some narrative.
As far as, like, Declan being there with the shovel?
I think for Atwood planning to shoot them. Like, I think he's trying to spin it.
Yeah, I think he was trying to say it was like a self-defense thing, where Declan is the murderer and he was coming in with the shovel to, like, kill them, like he was having an episode of some sort. And so he was going to be the only one who survived, and he was going to say, I had to defend against Declan, but Martha got caught in the crossfire.
You're so right. Yeah, that's how it goes, yeah.
This is part of why I thought the shovel thing was a little stupid, though, because I'm like, yeah, that I can see that.
Mm-hmm. But again, thankfully, we get Monroe showing up just on time. It's not exactly helpful because Declan ends up being grabbed and has a gun to, I think, his throat, which is a crazy place to have the gun.
I know, actually.
Extra scary, I think.
Yeah.
And so Monroe is kind of also at a bit of a stalemate about what to do.
I thought it was weird that Atwood's defense there was, oh, like, Monroe, you're not actually a cop, so if you shoot me, like, you're gonna get arrested. Because I'm like, I mean, but would he get in trouble? Yeah, he'd probably be arrested, but would he actually get in trouble for that, given the situation?
Yeah, I feel like it would also be self-defense at that point, right?
Yeah, that's where I was like, I don't know what the line is between, like, yeah, like, what can you do if you're not the one under the, under the main threat? But it must count for something. Like, this is where I'm like, I don't really know how law works, in enough depth to understand. But it does seem like if he's basically keeping Declan hostage and Monroe does something to stop that situation, even as not a cop, that there would be some level of protection.
Yeah, I don't know. But it doesn't really matter, I guess, anyway, because Monroe can't shoot without putting Declan in trouble.
Yeah.
So then Martha does something insane. Completely wild. Doesn't seem to care about Declan's life at all.
No.
Because she just hits Atwood with the shovel.
Yeah, that's nuts.
It's crazy.
It's just nuts. Yeah. And it really is. I mean, maybe it would have been worse otherwise, but it is the reason that Declan gets shot.
Right. And thankfully, shot in the shoulder, grazed, I think is what he says. So it's like not too bad, but like still traumatic as hell.
Yeah. And he still has to go through surgery and recovery and all that too.
Right. And it's like, it could have been so much worse considering where that gun was.
Yes. And like, does she get in trouble for the shovel hit? I know they mentioned she gets in trouble for the syrup thing, but do they say, oh, she's going to like get a charge for assaulting him or anything?
I don't think so. I think they mention for the syrup, she's out on bail. I think she is. Mm-hmm. And she'll be fine if she like testifies against Atwood, basically.
Right. Maybe that's all the argument we need on the if Monroe would have been okay, because it sounds like Martha was.
Right, yeah. But it all works out, and that is... Oh, I guess we didn't talk about motive. Why did Atwood do it? We were kind of right with the whole corruption thing. Like, Atwood was the one that was... I guess, is it embezzling? It is, right?
It is embezzling, right? Yeah, he was using his, power as an agent of the government to... funnel dollars into his own pocket.
And then obviously Porter had found all of that stuff out, so...
We were right that it was the situation where Porter sucks, but he was right about this.
Yeah.
Because it is embezzling. Like, Atwood's like, I was gonna pay it back. And I'm like, even if that was true, it would still be embezzling. You can't just give yourself a loan out of your government money.
Mm-hmm. It technically is tied to the theme park, because I think he was taking money from that. Mm-hmm. But it also, like, didn't have that much to do with the theme park. Surprisingly.
Yeah, as far as like the intention of building a theme park, that didn't really matter.
Yeah, and like the construction and like all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, really, like even though Porter was against the theme park, like this was an attempt to make sure it was done right.
Yeah, so Porter still an asshole for wanting to not have a theme park. There's no like justification for his reasonings for that other than kind of being selfish and a piece of shit.
I love the words you use for these situations.
It's the truth.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the end of the mystery part of this book. If you've been listening, you've probably noticed we didn't talk at all about the romance aspect. And don't worry, we realized. We did a little bit, I guess, but we didn't really want to get into it because we might as well wrap those up, like the 3 mysteries, Secret Son, Threatening Notes, Murder, all separate and all wrapped up nicely.
Yeah, I kind of am satisfied with the fact that the notes had nothing to do with the murder.
Yeah, I agree.
Shall we talk romance then?
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that happens kind of early in this half is the festival. We talked about it a little bit from the mystery angle, but that was also a date for our 2 guys, and I guess I was underwhelmed by it. It got stolen by the murder talk a little bit, but there was a bit of a moment of romance where they're kind of just like existing together and they decide to kiss and all that stuff. But I was like looking more for like a personal development between them, right? They've spent a little bit of time together. They did have that big talk, at the house when the murder was happening. Like there's not been nothing, but I was looking for more of us to see like what is the reason like they're going to like each other more as people as opposed to just having caught each other's eyes and initial interest. Like I was hoping that this would be the moment where we get development. I do feel like that was missed a little bit during the festival.
That's actually a good point. I didn't notice. This would have been a good moment for another like deep conversation because they have one like when they first meet, which is a little crazy, but I accepted it. This would have been the perfect time for another one of those. And the festival, I can't remember if we did spend more time than what was given to us. Like if they had, I think they had walked around a little bit and talked, but we weren't like given any of that information. So
yeah, it was just minimal.
Yeah, it felt like they got there, they talked about some murderers, and then they both went home. So yeah, even the festival itself was kind of led up to as being something kind of big and important for the town, and we don't really spend a lot of time there. Like we don't see a lot of it.
I think it was really just a vehicle to get townsfolk together, and maybe I didn't acknowledge it for that. Like I was really expecting it to lean into the date too, but really it was just like here's a way for us to talk to a lot of townsfolk at the same time when we're kind of suspicious of them all.
Yeah.
It prioritized the mystery, and it was fine. Like it's not that I hated it, right? Like it could have been worse. Like I just wanted more out of it.
I think the weird thing about this book is like there are scenes between Declan and Monroe where they're talking, and I'm kind of like, this is good. Like their conversations feel good, but at the same time, I'm like, Monroe doesn't feel like a character. What's happening? Like I don't know. There's something weird going on in my brain, I think.
If it helps, like I agree with you that I feel like Monroe is a relatively flat character, and this is part of where that goes missing. Of like we don't get more development of Monroe and like a reason for Declan to get more invested in him, and like I don't know, it is a bit matter of fact, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the matter of factness can feel like a character. Like I do think some of what you said in the first part, like of Monroe being kind of almost straight to the point and like a little bit more cool-headed. I don't remember exactly what words you used, but like I think that's accurate, and I think that comes through best when they're bantering a little bit. Like I get that vibe, I understand it, but there is still something about it where I'm like, it just doesn't feel, part of it just doesn't feel natural or like satisfying, I guess is a better way to put it. I think because of everything else going on and like Declan doing crazy things and Monroe not responding to any of that situation, it's kind of like there's like a weird dissonance happening somewhere. And like I get the minimalism and I get the cool-headed character, but like something about it just doesn't feel satisfying to me, I guess, is the problem here.
I agree and I disagree a little bit because I feel like the romance in the book was a bit intentionally understated, and I didn't mind that aspect because we've described as some aspect of it as feeling a bit more mature and like I described it as slow in the first half. Like I think those kinds of aspects of it were like it is a romance, but like we haven't gone crazy and we haven't gone full trope with it. That it does feel different. I agree with you, and like maybe it's not satisfying because it doesn't quite develop to the place you would expect it to by the end, but it doesn't develop to that place, right? Like there's no, at the end, like they're interested in trying it, right? Like Declan's like, I'll probably stick around, but you get no promises that they're going to be together forever. You don't get an I love you, you just get a I care for you, right? Like there's no sex, right? Like it doesn't like push the romance to a place that it hasn't really earned it yet, because it really hasn't earned a whole lot at the time you get to the end of the book. Like it does develop slowly. We don't get enough out of it, but that's okay because the romance is budding. Still, at the end of the book, it's not there.
Yeah, I guess I get what you mean. It just, part of the issues, I guess, brought up during this romance feel like big deals, though. Like the idea of Declan having to move back to New York and like that relationship issue coming about. And even just Declan going away for Christmas and missing Christmas. Like, those things feel so important. And, like, obviously Monroe doesn't care about them because I think there is a certain maturity there. And, like, he got divorced for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, like, fine on his angle. And then Declan is, like, having a freak out because he feels like he's letting Monroe down or, like, that he needs to make some kind of choice, whatever. Like, those feel like important relationship issues. But, like, yeah, to your point, they've known each other 6 days, and it feels like or Declan at least feels like he's fathoming very important relationship issues.
Mm-hmm.
The problem also is that those relationship issues don't matter. Like, the idea that Declan has to live in New York to be a writer is ridiculous. Especially if he's just living in Vermont, he can travel if he needs to talk to his agent or his publishing house or any of that kind of stuff. So, like, yeah, the idea of like moving in with your partner and like where are you settling down and like all of that is important relationship stuff, right? And that's basically what Declan is trying to figure out. But I'm like, it also doesn't need to be a problem, and also it's like not a problem as well. So it just, I guess that's like the issue is like Declan is not at the maturity level of Monroe.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And so it makes Monroe feel a bit like he doesn't care at all. And I think Declan thinks that sometimes too. Like, why aren't you fighting for me? Like, he doesn't say those things, but he's thinking those things. Mm-hmm. And so I think it just casts Monroe in like a worse light a little bit, because we don't spend enough time with Monroe to really feel how he's feeling about the relationship. Like, we know he likes Declan, but like, to your point, why does he like Declan? Like, we don't really see any of that development. So it's just like, I feel like they're working on two different timelines here. I don't know. Maybe that's where my struggles are coming in.
I mean, I agree with you because Declan overdoes it, right? He does have kind of a strong emotional response to the idea that he might have to leave. And it only becomes that because he must, in the back of his mind, see the option of not leaving.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think he is just, in a sense, he is being dramatic. But on the other hand, he's not like making a confrontation out of it.
Yeah.
You know, like that's kind of, I guess, the mature part that he still retains. It's like he's trying to figure it out for himself, figure out what he wants. Monroe just has a better sense of what he wants, really. But maybe the disappointing part of it is Declan wanting to go back to New York. Yeah, maybe part of it was work, but you kind of hear when he talks about New York to Monroe, like some of the other reasons why he likes being in the city, you know, of like having things to do and like being nearby things that make his life convenient, including for work too, right? Like I get wanting it to be a case of like, well, like I could live somewhere else and come in the city, but it'd be a lot easier to do all the things that I do in my day-to-day life and all the people I interact with to stay there. Also, just like moving out of a place you've lived for a while is obviously a big change, especially if you have like a community, friends, etc. His sister's out there, so there's like a lot of other reasons, and maybe they could have leaned into this more. Like there's a lot of other reasons he could have wanted to stay in New York, such that like when we get to the end and he's like, yeah, maybe I will stay here, I was like a little disappointed because they had gone through all of this like thinking and, you know, discussion about place, and it just felt like they had landed on this really like cool thing of like, we really do like each other and want to explore this more, but does it really make sense to do that? Like we have different goals, and like, you know, a relationship is more than just liking each other. It's like we kind of have to align a bit, and they weren't aligning. So I almost I would have been happy for the book to end a different way too, of like, well, like we had our thing, and like, yeah, I stuck around a few extra days because I was hospitalized, but I do feel confident that I want to live my life in New York. I think that would have been cool too.
I don't know. I feel like part of his love for New York is job based, which makes sense, and his family is there as well. But like, I don't know if he entirely loves New York. Like, I feel like that's the point, is that he doesn't love it.
Yeah, maybe he's just kind of defaulting to it.
But I still think it matters to him, right? Because, yeah, like, he does have work, he does have his family. It does make some sense, I suppose. But I'm also just like, he mentions, oh, I could visit on the weekend and holidays. And I'm like, you're a writer. Like, what do you mean the weekends and holidays?
I know, like, you're not going into your desk job 9 to 5.
Right.
That's such a good point. Well, yeah, that part of the conversation almost lost me, though, because, yeah, like, why, if you actually really do want to try this out and care for this person, I think you would try to do that. Like, maybe you don't like each other enough for this.
I think weekends and holidays is, like, definitely not enough time. The idea that, like, long distance also wouldn't work is a little interesting, but I guess they're both, like, in their 30s and they just don't want to put up with it. Understandable, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And obviously Monroe has experience with this. Like, the reason him and his wife split up is because she wanted to stay in LA and he didn't want to be there. I wish that was brought up as, like, a reason why he's reacting this way during this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it would have tied back to the beginning of the book. But, you know, whatever. We don't talk about that. But we can still understand Monroe's perspective a little bit because of that. But it makes sense why he might not want to try. But, like, the idea that Declan, writer, who also has, like, no work right now, can't travel more than the weekends and the holidays is insane to me.
Yeah, I hear you.
But that's just, like, me harping on this one situation that I just think was put in for the sake of this tension between their relationship. It was kind of unnecessary.
Yeah, I think there's just other romances I've read where I'm like, this is such a synthetic and unnecessary drama. And I felt that come on a little bit when he got the call from the agent of, like, there's this party in New York tonight that you need to be at. And I was like, oh boy, you know, it's this again. But at least that one actually got an explanation. And in some other books, it's like they never explain why this is so sudden and so important at the last minute. This one made more sense. But maybe just because it didn't really have a huge downstream effect, and maybe because this book is a little concise, it didn't bother me all that much.
Yeah, I wish it was a little less concise in moments like this, because I think you brought up something interesting about him kind of battling with whether he wants to go back to New York or not. Like, I think we could have just had more of that a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then I feel like that would have made this conversation feel a little bit better for me. Mm-hmm. But it's fine. I think I care more about the party situation than the moving to New York situation.
That's fair.
In regards to drama being brought up for them. But both are fine. They don't really matter in the end.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't choose to go to New York when he really made the right choice, I think, to address the Martha situation in the moment. But he could have not. He could have just been like, I'm leaving, so.
Yeah, it does force his hand. He's, like, kind of forced to make the Martha situation because she could die. So it's not like he actually chooses necessarily to skip out on the party, which could be a little cheapening, but I think it's fine.
I mean, luckily that means it doesn't ruin his career that he misses it, because his agent is like, yep, that's valid. That's a real valid reason.
Did get shot, so that's fine.
But yeah, I guess so. They have their little, we're gonna try it out, and Declan's gonna stick around situation, which of course means that Declan's probably gonna go back living in that house. Like, no.
And, like, I don't think this entire time he's had heat.
No, he hasn't.
Which is extra wild.
Does he get a window at the end of the book? They never really said.
No, they never finish it.
Okay, it's like they have a date, but I'm like, is it 20 degrees?
That's insane. I don't know. Like, Logan came to fix your window, and then you thought he was a murderer, so it never got finished.
Got arrested, yeah. No, like, nothing gets done, right? Like, the shovel is never used to shovel snow. The window pane never gets fixed. Like, and now I'm sure his basement's a total mess that he's probably never going to address either.
I get it's his family cabin, but, like, damn. Ask to stay in the B&B, because, like, right. At least you got fed there, you know?
Honestly.
I think that's it, though. I guess to wrap up the romance, I didn't mind it. I just, like, something about it fell off to me, but, like, I feel like that's a me problem always, forever. I don't think anything about it was particularly bad, so.
That's fair. I will say maybe it felt a little safe, because if it did go further along, that's where I think it does get riskier, right? Like, especially in a short book, like, if this romance advances too fast, or they're, like, too, like, gushy about it, like, I think those are the things that tend to put us off in romance, right? If it's like it's moving too fast or like it's unearned and like those types of things. I feel like those are usually the ways we describe romances we don't like. And I think it kind of dodges it a little bit by not getting too far into it.
Right. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, for sure. But book over, happy ending for everyone, except for the people that have passed away. So sorry. We can probably talk about ratings for this thing. I can just go first.
Yeah, go for it.
Because, I haven't entirely been sure how I wanted to rate this. Because it's not a bad book. Like, the mystery was interesting. The romance was pretty good, all things considered. Obviously, I like a lot of character and like indirect characterizations and like all of that kind of stuff. Like purple prose is for me. It's obviously not for this book. So I think style-wise, it's not exactly for me. And that kind of bleeds into maybe why I didn't like the romance so much. Like I liked the romance, but I was also kind of like Monroe just felt a little bit lacking, I guess, is the main problem.
Yeah, I get it. You want your love interest to be interesting.
And I think we got hints of him being interesting, but I just kind of wanted more of him a little bit. Just reacting to things, I suppose. But all of that considered, I think I might go with a 3.5. Like, I liked it, and I loved it a little bit, but like, I feel like not enough for a 4. I don't know. I might be being too harsh here, but I think like a 3.5 maybe is pretty okay.
All right, I see that. For me, I would say overall I really enjoyed reading this book, and I'm kind of the other direction of like I'm about short and sweet. Like I like direct. I like one plot point to the next. In some ways, it did feel a little bit like a TV show in that way, which I'm not saying is a good or bad thing, but like that's kind of the vibe it gave me with the pacing. So it kept me engaged the whole time. I think my criticisms are like Declan did kind of like annoy me a little bit in the second half of the book with some of his behavior. I think it's fine because he kind of justifies it with a bit of self-criticism, right? Like I liked that, but there were some scenes where I'm like, he's just doing too much, like he's saying too much. Particularly in the scene with Atwood, he like makes a very specific comment of like, you gave Evan the money, and then while Evan was counting money and distracted, you killed him. And like, he has no reason to know that. So like, there's like little things like that where I'm like, I don't understand why Declan is communicating this way. So that missed me a little bit. And then there were also just some phrases that came up a lot in the book. You brought up one of them last time, which was like talking about the scent of
you
Monroe.
caught it this time.
It came up at least twice that I noticed in the second half of the book. But there were some other ones like sometimes he would say things to Monroe that were pretty direct, and he would refer to them as raw. And that's fine, but like it happened multiple times. And then there's this word which like I love, but I definitely think was overused, and that was infinitesimally.
Oh,
and like I noticed all three of these words come up multiple times in the same context, and I was like, I mean, that's fine. They do describe the thing, but I think the word should be varied enough that I don't notice it, So like that kind of like I hate to be kind of like that feels a little elementary to focus on, I guess, but like it did stick out to me as like I kind of wish I wasn't noticing this.
It took you out of it a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, these are nitpicks, right? Like again, overall, I really liked the story. I would definitely read something else that this author writes. Like I had a fun time with it. So it's just really little things for me that would bring it down from being like at the top. So I think I'm going to give it a 4. With that, because again, generally enjoyed. I do think there's room for better. So that's the only reason really it doesn't go up above that.
Okay, yeah, pretty high from us, all things considered.
Yeah, I would say.
I wasn't sure because of the genres going on, but this one was actually pretty good.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I was a little afraid of the cozy mystery genre. Like I thought I might not engage with it. Like I thought it might feel like too kitschy or like I don't know, just silly. But no, I liked it.
Yeah, I mean, it did some of the typical things you expect with, like, the meddling and the putting yourself in danger, which usually I don't vibe with very well.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think, like, my main issues usually come with, like, does the main character actually try to figure it out? Because sometimes they just stumble into things. I think Declan definitely, to his fault, was trying to figure it out. So that's always good.
Yeah, I think the story felt controlled almost. Right? Like it was short, but it was paced, and like it didn't go off the rails. Like I think sometimes it feels like they go off the rails, and that's not what this was.
Yeah, for sure. So to close us out, I'm thinking maybe a good vibe. What about you?
Yeah, that sounds good. For me, I would say something that was really interesting about this book. I'm actually kind of stealing it from Taylor last episode. Was there were a few moments where you get Declan kind of processing the trauma that he's experiencing, not necessarily fixing it, right? Like just like experiencing it. So he like gets some nightmares when he's sleeping back at the cabin, or like he's at the end mentions, he still wakes up in the middle of the night, like nervous about sounds that are happening around the house. Like this wasn't just casual, right? Like this was an event that impacted him in negative ways. And I think a lot of other murder mystery, it's like, wow, murder mystery, so cool, so fun, and like we forget that like people died and like people were threatened and in danger. So while it was by no means like a focus of this book, I really thought it was cool for the author to like give a couple of paragraphs here and there to those thoughts.
Like he did dangerous things, there are going to be consequences to those things.
Right. Especially because he starts off kind of not in the best mental state with like the death of his parents and all that.
Yeah, which we do get a little bit of that in the beginning, and in the second part we also get the parents mentioned again as well. Not a lot in a lot of detail, but it is like a somber moment that I think is fitting for somebody that's still grieving.
Yeah. What about you?
I think for me, I liked the side characters a lot.
Shout out to Janice.
For sure. I do think, considering we didn't spend a lot of time with them, surprisingly, they did feel very alive and like fleshed out. Like I think the way they were characterized was well done. Like I feel like I got the vibe for the people throughout the town for the most part.
I agree.
And the way they were being affected by what was going on. Like Martha at the beginning, very like bright, bubbly, like obviously living her best life while committing crimes, and like everything is working out for her. And then we see how that like the stressors impact her and Evan, and then obviously what happens at the end of this book. And yeah, Janice, you mentioned, highlight. There's just a lot of good side characters going on in here.
Yeah, I think with you talking about that, it made me realize like there's a lot of there's frequent but independent interactions with the villagers. I want to call them, but like the townspeople.
Villagers.
The townspeople, because like that's what kind of gives that feel, right? Like we do get multiple interactions with Martha, with Janice, and like it's not just like a one and done. It's not like one really long interaction. Like we do kind of check in over time. And I think that kind of gives that development you're talking about.
Yeah. I think it's like fitting in a book like this. I don't think this is supposed to be a series, but like it would make sense if these were characters we were seeing again.
There's kind of a reference at the end of it of being like, oh, there's got to be more mysteries hiding in this town. And I was like, oh.
Oh, well, you never know. Yeah. I don't remember when this book came out. I think like 2020 or something.
2020, yeah.
Yeah, but I guess it's always possible. But like I feel like that is also kind of the cozy mystery vibe, right? Like there always seems to be another mystery, but also the town as its cast of characters is very important to what's going on. But that is the end of this book, I suppose, and the end of our holiday season. So, happy holidays, happy new year, etc., etc. Next month, yeah, we'll do this part first. Next month, we are reading something very much not like this.
Kind of more in our typical category, I think.
Yeah, we're getting back into those gothic kind of fantasy mystery vibes, because we are reading Starling House by Alex E. Harrow, up to but not including chapter 17. The book basically seems to be about a dying sort of town that has a weird haunted house, the Starling House, which appeared when its owner, I suppose, the author E. Starling, disappeared. There is an heir, Arthur Starling. Nobody seems to mess with the house or that heir, I suppose, but Opal, who seems to be in need of a job, ends up, I guess, working there. It feels a bit Jane Eyre-ish, where we get like a brooding man, and then Opal, not necessarily a governess, but working in this house, and it seems like Opal and Arthur are gonna have to deal with things, get closer. I don't know. There's also a romance tag, so we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, kind of haunted house, gothic, maybe some Poe vibes. I'm kind of feeling that way as well.
I was feeling Poe vibes for sure.
Yeah.
Especially just the name of the book that they refer to, or whatever piece of literature, the Underland. I was like, yeah, it's feeling like Poe.
Yeah. It also makes me think of the book we read. What was it called? History of Wild Places.
Oh, History of Wild Places, the culty one?
Yeah. Because there was a book in that as well about like an under something.
Gotcha.
But yeah, definitely a hard turn from what we have just read. But I feel like this is definitely within our wheelhouse.
Oh, yeah.
And I've wanted to read it for a while.
New year, same us.
For sure. So if you have any thoughts about In the Winter Woods or about Starling House, our Twitter is 5050_books. We also have YouTube, Goodreads, all in the description. I guess we'll see you next year.
Goodbye.